Hello and welcome to a new video. This one is taking a slightly different direction from what you and I are used to, which is spirituality and esoteric matters, Zen Buddhism and the rest. This one is about communism and capitalism and why they both fail. This is an excerpt from my book, Revolution Road, the fourth episode of An Outsider's Odyssey. So without further ado, let's get into it. The state must govern as it must, with its taxes, institutions, laws, and facilities, because we are nowhere near a stage of evolution where man can self-govern. One cannot conceive of a world where everyone had transcended the need to be dependent, to be governed, to be led, and establish order. Disorder in society is a result of internal disorder. War begins inside and spreads like a cancer until we have a warlike, competitive society. Left and right will battle it out in an eternal war of opposites. As enmity breeds enmity, fueling the us against them mentality that is the inevitable outcome of ethnocentrism. Revolutions and counter-revolutions are the unhappy codependent consequences of a clash of values, of a fundamentally split and divided world. A battle of wills and forces between individualism and collectivism, without dialogue to develop a middle way. I share the distaste for unbridled capitalism as my peers, but certainly did not want to be part of another 20th century nightmare of communism. While advances have been made in scientific and technological development, history has proved that communism, as it was practiced in Russia and China, failed. It failed because of the tremendous cost of human lives, the untold misery of labour camps, meaningless work in factories and offices, mass conformity to a monolithic machine of materialist production, at the expense of creative and spiritual development. Communism has a history of mass murder, from Stalin's brutal regime in the USSR to Mao's China and Cambodia's Khmer Rouge. The 20th century was a horror show, resulting in the deaths of tens of millions of people due to famine, executions, and overwork. The utopian vision of Marx and Engels with equal rights and equality of outcome created the grandest social experiment ever devised and exploded like a nuclear bomb. It created a police state of informers. It could not provide a decent standard of living, for its people. It had crippling inefficiencies and gross mismanagement. It produced poor quality goods and wasted valuable resources. Because communism abolished free markets, state officials had no market prices or exchange ratios to guide them in planning production. Without market prices, how do planners weigh the relative values of raw materials like aluminium, iron, lumber, synthetics, etc., and of oil fields, railways, farms, power plants, bridges, and housing? A centrally planned economy, which was supposed to feed the entire Soviet Union, for example, resulted in millions of Russians starving during the 1920s and 30s. Communism produced the twin evils of dictatorship and totalitarianism. This entailed a large military expenditure and repressive environment. The constant threat of war and keeping internal dissidents in line put a further strain on resources. Vast sums of money were spent on secret police and spies. Setting up concentration camps and gulags was expensive. Innovation was discouraged. An atmosphere of fear and paranoia encouraged. Independent thinking and free speech were severely frowned upon and could put your life at risk. Bold ideas that challenged the system could get you eliminated. Constructive criticism of superiors and the system were made nigh impossible. So the bosses continue to act in their old, inefficient ways. Without critical debate, mistakes cannot be spotted and rectified. Accurate decisions cannot be taken in the absence of inaccurate information. Thus, problems go unsolved. Loyalty is a valuable trait, but taken too far, it produces negative results. The kind of fanatical loyalty that communist regimes produce allows for inept and incompetent bureaucrats to go unpunished. Comradeship is valued over competence. Communism produces resentment among workers who cannot speak about their individual views, and this leads to hatred of the system. How can one be motivated to work hard in this environment? Having moral incentives to work hard is one thing, but what about the large number of people who are only motivated by financial incentives and material gain? People are greedy, and imposing external means to weed this out won't change a person from within. Who wants to work for the sole motive of being a good worker after all? Employee of the month. Regardless of whether they worked hard or not, they were paid the same. And who wants to be the same as everyone else? If a factory worker earns as much as a surgeon, where's the motivation to attend medical school or obtain a degree? Equality of opportunity is not the same as equality of outcome. If you do not produce something worthwhile for the state, then your work was considered meaningless. Thus, artistic endeavours, such as painting, poetry, and sculpture, were not considered a viable means of earning a living. In socialist societies, art was heavily censored and artists often persecuted and even faced charges of high treason. Collectivisation meant that the right to private property was denied. Those that opposed forced collectivisation were taken out of commission. Private farming was not permitted. Individualism made room for the collective. Fundamental human rights were violated in order to create a tick-tock society that functioned like a Swiss clock. There's a flip side to the coin. Capitalism. Why does capitalism fail? Capitalism fails because it is fundamentally unfair and creates great wealth among the few while bringing poverty to the many. It rewards only those whose work produces the greatest added marketable value and not those who work long and hard. Capitalism allows for inherited wealth and the transfer of private property to a designated new proprietor upon the death of the previous owner. Inherited wealth is not earned, but simply given. This leads to a wealthy, entitled class and segregation among society. It bestows titles like Sir or Lord, who earn respect and admiration purely because of their familial lineage and inherited wealth, who command a high social status without doing anything to earn that title. This confers a decisive advantage over average people in society. Their inherited wealth bestows upon them a virtue which overrides higher virtues, such as wisdom, compassion, intelligence, kindness, generosity, honesty, and fairness, and allows them to control people through power, position, and prestige. This entails privilege for the few and servitude for the many. Man is no longer judged by his character, but his bank account. And because morality is not expected of him, well, he's at liberty to become decadent and corrupt, pursuing only self-interest at the expense of others and everything else. Money is not the true economy of things. Energy is. The real currency of nature is energy and consciousness. Human economic systems are subsystems of nature. It is the earth that produces all the resources and raw materials, food, clothing, petroleum, metals, wood, minerals, medicines, and machines. It is not the prerogative of one man to accumulate these resources as he sees fit, but for man to work together to appropriate these resources among the community in harmony with natural laws. Otherwise, problems of environmental destruction, climate change, poverty, and extinction of species are the inevitable result. If man does not live in balance with nature, then nature will eliminate him. There can be no deviation from the natural order of things without repercussions, as the universe is always bringing everything back into balance, and every person is born equal. The notion of land ownership is human arrogance. No one owns anything, and everything is on loan. We are produced from nature, and are, if anything, owned by nature, not the other way around. No person can change or subjugate the laws of nature, and cannot stop old age, sickness, and death. Thus, the true purpose of living is not to capitalise on the exploitation of resources in order to make oneself more comfortable, but to facilitate a way of living that makes the best use of these resources to create a fair and just society in alignment with natural laws, so that everyone benefits. Capitalism reduces man to a mere beast, which only appeals to his base nature and desires. He is always asking, what can I get for myself? Thus his actions are motivated by greed, and his conduct governed by self-centeredness. With this predilection, one can aggrandise himself as being the most virtuous, solely on account of one's wealth, being that qualities of compassion, care, empathy, justice, and kindness don't matter. Millions of poor people work hard to support themselves and their family, but they see nothing of the benefit of their superiors, who might not or hardly have to work at all, and yet see all of it. Capitalism is always seeking to reduce labour costs, and the lowest wage paid ensures the highest profit for the owner. When automation appeared, human labour was less essential, and so those who did acquire the skills, talents, and motivation to make contributions found themselves unemployed. While genuine skill and talent are often necessary for the production of goods, all a rich man has to do are own things, buy and sell things, and tell others what to do. He doesn't have to solve problems. He simply throws money at them and employs the required professional. There is no unemployment in communism, but in capitalism, there are always fewer job opportunities and job seekers. Capitalism creates an unemployed class who are stigmatised and dependent on the welfare system and blamed for many of society's ills, instead of laying the blame at where it really originates: the rich. An unemployed person is made to feel worthless solely on the fact that he cannot produce anything of value, which is blatantly false, since there are many talented, skilled, and creative people among the unemployed who have so much to contribute, if only their virtues were appreciated and their contributions valued. Capitalism fails because it fails for most people. In a world where wealth were distributed equally and fairly within reasonable parameters, there would be no disparity of wealth, nor division of classes, which creates resentment and hatred among the have-nots, who turn to crime, theft, robbery, and violence to get a little for themselves. For if virtue is deduced only in terms of wealth, what moral incentives exist among the have-nots? It is the rich and powerful who make the laws to protect their own interests, and if these interests are violated, then what do? The wealthy class, they go to war. They own the military, after all. They defend their property, their land, and they won't simply give it away. One of the merits of capitalism, of course, is free speech, that most sacrosanct of virtues. Free speech is a fundamental human right, and its significance cannot be underestimated. But in and of itself does not change the nature of the system and its downfalls. One can protest, picket, and say one's thing, but that will not alter the decisions of those in power. They take the example of the Second War in Iraq in 2003, when 80% of the world's population, including myself, spoke out against military engagement, but George Bush Jr. and Tony Blair gave the go-ahead anyway. The fact is that even though one can speak freely, it doesn't change anything in society. It only allows one to vent and say one's piece. Just one opinion among the many. Only those who have money and power and status within the system can actually make the laws that govern the rest of us. In a world where money talks, free speech is cheap. Capitalism favours the rich who have less to lose by failing in business, because there is always another rich individual or institution that can bail the rich person out. Take Donald Trump, for example, classic case. How many times has that man gone bankrupt? How many times has he come back to irritate the rest of us and tell us what to do and how to live? So he may lose money, but he'll soon be back in the game, whereas one without much capital won't be able to summon sufficient money to repay past loans and pay the startup costs for a new business. He's bankrupt and he might never recover. It's a fact that around 70% of businesses fail, so the not rich man has more to lose financially. Any moral system must have the survival of the species as its highest value, because morals cannot matter to the dead man. Other values are additional and dependent upon man being alive. They are therefore conditional. Capitalism does not put the survival of humanity as something of importance, but only the survival of capitalism. It is concerned only for its own preservation, like the corporation, staying in business and doing business as usual. For the capitalist, nothing is personal, only business. Capitalism corrupts the minds and hearts of those in secular and non-secular positions alike by enlisting them at the service of capitalists who pay them below the table. It blindly pursues profit at the expense of any other value, putting property rights before human rights, and enshrines them in a constitution. Can you see the obscenity? The injustice? In this way, capitalism acts as a predator, preying on the weak to feed itself and grow bigger and stronger, instead of using its power and strength as it should to protect and nourish the weak. Capitalism creates its own form of tyranny by enslaving the people in debt with high interest loans, mortgages, and hire purchase agreements. High profile bankers continue to go unpunished for their crimes in creating a depression or recession, while those who steal a small item, like a can of Coke in a store, go to jail or must do community service. Politicians, lawyers, judges, and policemen who receive bribes are not held accountable for their misdemeanors. Bankers' financial embezzlements go unpunished. Huge criminal enterprises are thus permitted to thrive as they line the pockets of bankers, lawmen, and other high-ranking officials. In other words, money talks and always has the last word. Capitalism rewards special people, sports people, actors, stars, and celebrities who get paid 1,000 or 1,000,000 times higher than regular hard-working people, simply because they have a certain skill or talent and are allowed much more of the fruits of the earth than they deserve. Why is the actor of greater importance to society than the street sweeper? Who is of greater utility? Why are some professions regarded as so much more important and special than others? Why is a professional footballer paid 1,000 times more than a surgeon, for Christ's sake? Why is a CEO entitled to more perks than a park ranger? Why are capitalists so obsessed with money, power, and status, as if these things can grant some kind of permanent happiness, when they know that this is impossible? Why is it so important to be number one, the richest, best, most accomplished, most ambitious, all the superlatives? Why is ambition so cherished, material objects so valued? Why should so few enjoy so much while so many have to live on the brink of poverty? Now, these are questions that I've asked myself and that I've explored in my book. And I would be grateful for any contributions you have to make to the discussion, any questions you have. And, well, I'll leave it there. And thanks very much for listening.